Hey there, sleepyheads, and welcome back to Boring History for Sleep. Tonight we're embarking on a journey to a place often romanticised but rarely understood in its raw, unfiltered truth, the Wild West. Beyond the legends of daring outlaws and stoic lawmen, there was a fundamental gritty reality that shaped every moment of frontier life, what people ate, how they got it, and what that said about their very existence. If you find yourself enjoying these quiet historical explorations, and they bring you a moment of peace, a gentle tap on the subscribe button, and a soft like on the video truly help us continue these journeys. And we'd love to hear where you're drifting from tonight in the comments below. So dim the lights, perhaps turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together as we step into the unvarnished reality of a Wild West saloon. You push through the swinging doors and the American Wild West, that vast landscape defined by harshness, untamed expanses and an unyielding demand for survival, truly punches you in the nostrils. This isn't the romanticised aroma of sizzling steak and fresh cornbread that Hollywood might lead you to expect. No, this is a complex, almost overwhelming sensory assault. You're immediately enveloped by the potent blend of sweaty cowboys, the damp, earthy scent of wet tobacco clinging to every surface, the cloying sweetness of stale old beer that has soaked into the wooden floorboards for years, and the unmistakable lingering presence of horses that, by the smell of it, haven't seen a bath in a decade. It's an olfactory symphony of frontier life, raw and unapologetic, and it permeates every breath you take and every meal you might attempt to eat here. The air itself feels thick, almost chewable, and if you're particularly lucky, or perhaps unlucky, you might catch the faintest hint of something cooking in the back, a distant greasy sizzle or the low gurgle of a pot that offers a vague promise of sustenance through the oppressive atmosphere. This powerful earthy bouquet isn't just background noise. It's an active participant in your dining experience, colouring every bite and sip. You can almost taste the dust and sweat on your tongue before you even get a plate in front of you. Saloons in their rudimentary fashion did make some attempts, however crude, to mask these pervasive odours. You see the scatter of fresh sawdust on the floor, ostensibly there to absorb spills, but in truth it also serves as a porous sponge for every spilled drink, every splash of spit and every other unmentionable liquid that finds its way to the floor. Then there's the pipe smoke, a constant dense cloud, thick enough to cause temporary memory loss, as one weary traveller might joke, inadvertently adding yet another layer to the already aggressive olfactory assault. You find yourself unconsciously fanning a hand in front of your face even though you know it's a futile gesture. The barkeeps, however, are unfazed by this assault. They move with an almost practised indifference, swatting flies off counters with a rag that you swear has witnessed every frontier brawl since the California gold rush began. It's a small telling detail highlighting the prevailing lack of hygiene and setting a distinctly low bar for your expectations regarding any food you might consume. They'd likely declare with a shrug and a dry laugh, "You don't come here for the air, friend," as if acknowledging the truth of the matter makes it more palatable. And in this world, perhaps it does. Your stomach might lurch, then quiet, accepting this new reality. Despite the rough exterior and the overwhelming scent of 1,000 unwashed days, food you realise is always being made somewhere in these frontier bastions. It's often tucked away, hidden from immediate view within what you'd call a hole-in-the-wall fire pit. Here, over embers that glow with a dull, persistent heat, beans bubble with a sluggish rhythm, their earthy smell struggling to assert itself against the dominant saloon odours. Or if not the pit, you might spot a figure hunched over a simmering pot, a grumpy woman in a soot-covered apron, perhaps stirring mystery stew with a spoon that by its sheer heft and general air of defiance could resolve a bar fight as effectively as it stirs the pot. You learn quickly that in this environment multi-purpose tools are not a luxury but a necessity, and a cook's ladle might be as effective as a six-shooter for maintaining order in the kitchen. The faint sizzle of frying lard, a sound almost drowned out by the raucous chatter, and the occasional clink of glasses or the distant gurgle of a pot offers a promise of sustenance. It's a subtle auditory cue, a reminder that despite the prevailing chaos and discomfort, your fundamental need for food might actually be met. You feel a strange sense of relief, a primal satisfaction in the mere possibility of calories, regardless of how questionable their origin might be. Your body, accustomed to the lean times of the frontier, recognizes this small reassurance. Saloons, you quickly discover, are far from modern restaurants. The concept simply doesn't exist here. There are no menus to peruse, no neatly printed lists of culinary delights. Formal servers are an unheard of luxury. Instead, you'll find a few splintered tables scattered haphazardly across the sawdust-covered floor, accompanied by rickety chairs that groan under your weight, threatening to collapse at any moment. These are the designated zones where patrons can eat, drink, argue, all three in rapid succession. The rough, often sticky texture of the wood under your hand is a constant tactile reminder of the frontier's unpolished nature. You brush your fingers over the grain, feeling the accumulated grime, and the occasional splinter, a small, uncomfortable truth that grounds you firmly in this raw reality. The seating arrangements are communal by default, born of necessity rather than design. You might find yourself sharing a table with strangers who might rob you or save your life tomorrow, a silent understanding passing between you as you both eye the same jug of water or the communal salt shaker. This isn't about personal space. It's about making do with what's available, a shared experience of transient survival. Your back might ache from the hard, unforgiving bench, and the cool, rough surface of the tin plate in front of you reinforces the utilitarian purpose of the meal. This isn't fine dining. It's fuel, pure and simple, often washed down with whiskey, if the food, as the common wisdom dictates, made you sick. It's a desperate pragmatism, a self-medication against the harsh realities of a diet that could at best be described as challenging. There's an almost brutal simplicity to the communication around food here. It's devoid of pleasantries, stripped down to its most functional form. You won't hear flowery descriptions or polite inquiries. Instead, you wait, you observe, and you learn to anticipate. For the regulars, those grizzled faces that seem permanently etched with the dust and sun of 100 trails, the cook might simply bellow, beans or stew. It's a question and a command all rolled into one, delivered without looking up from the bubbling pot. And you, if you wish to eat, are expected to shout back your choice just as unceremoniously, without so much as a glance in the cook's direction. It's a testament to the fast-paced, no-nonsense environment, where efficiency trumps any notion of decorum. For you, the newcomer, however, the process is a little different, marked by a silent assessing stare. That silent assessing stare from the cook is a whole different experience for you, the newcomer. It's a gaze that cuts through your bravado, stripping away any pretense you might carry from a more civilized world. Their eyes, often narrowed against the smoke, and the glare from the open fire pit, seemed to be trying to guess whether you were going to pay or pass out before the plate hit the table. It's an unspoken interrogation, a rapid calculation of your solvency and your stability. You feel the weight of their scrutiny, a subtle power dynamic that shifts the simplest transaction into a quiet test of character. There's no welcome here, no friendly smile. Just an unvarnished appraisal of your worth in this transient, often unforgiving environment. You might clear your throat or shift your weight, feeling oddly self-conscious, a sensation you thought you had left behind somewhere east of the Missouri. This isn't just about food. It's about establishing your place, however temporary, in the saloon's unspoken hierarchy. Once you've passed this silent assessment, whether through a stoic glance or a quick, confident nod, and manage to articulate your desire for, say, beans, the reality of dining in a Wild West saloon truly settles in. This experience isn't about taste or comfort or any of the pleasantries you might associate with a meal. No, this is purely about survival. You eat what they have, not what you want. because in this raw frontier the luxury of choice is almost entirely non-existent. You find yourself sharing a table perhaps with a grizzled miner whose pickaxe glints dully under the dim light, or a quiet cowboy whose eyes scan the room constantly, a stranger who might rob you or save your life tomorrow. The air is thick with the unspoken possibilities of such encounters, and every clink of a tin plate or scrape of a chair adds to the frontier's low hum. The physical sensations are constant reminders of the utilitarian purpose of your meal. The hard texture of the bench beneath you digs into your backside, unforgiving and unyielding. The cool, rough surface of the tin plate in front of you feels almost primitive, a stark contrast to the porcelain or china of a bygone life. There's no soft linen napkin, no polished silverware, just a metal fork that might be slightly bent or a spoon that has seen more mileage than a stagecoach. You pick up a piece of the coarse, sometimes stale bread, and the rough texture against your fingers confirms that this is sustenance, not delicacy. And then there's the question of what to do if the food, after all that, made you sick. The answer you quickly learn is rarely a doctor or a comforting brew of herbal tea. No, in the Wild West, the immediate pragmatic solution is often a shot of whiskey. You wash it down the harsh burning sensation, doing double duty cleansing your palate of questionable flavours, and more importantly, dulling any immediate discomfort in your gut. It's a desperate pragmatism, a self-medication that highlights the sheer lack of alternatives and the stoic acceptance of physical hardship. You learn to appreciate the numbing quality of cheap alcohol, understanding that sometimes the best remedy for a meal you shouldn't have eaten is to forget you ate it at all. The entire act of eating here becomes an exercise in efficiency and endurance, a gritty, unvarnished portrait of human needs stripped bare in this unforgiving landscape. With the initial hurdle of entering and ordering behind you, your attention now turns to the very bedrock of frontier sustenance, the actual food. You learn very quickly that the Wild West diet is not one of variety or gourmet delights, but one dictated by sheer necessity and the availability of resources that could withstand the unforgiving journey across vast distances. And at the absolute apex of this frontier cuisine, not for deliciousness but for its unparalleled utility, sits the humble bean. Beans, you soon discover, are the indomitable staple. They are the unsung heroes of the frontier kitchen pinto, black or navy, served morning, noon and night. These are not merely a food item. They're a symbol of endurance, a testament to the fact that they could survive an apocalypse, a gunfight and a stampede without breaking a sweat. You imagine them small and resilient, a veritable army of caloric reliability, providing a bland yet utterly dependable base for men who hadn't seen a fresh vegetable since they left Kansas. The sheer simplicity of their existence is baffling yet undeniably effective. The smell of boiling beans is a constant earthy presence in the saloon. It's not a fragrant aroma, more of a deep persistent hum beneath the other, more aggressive saloon smells. It tells you without words that food is being prepared, that life in its most basic form continues. You might detect a faint, almost metallic tang in the background, a subtle hint of the pot itself, or perhaps the quality of the water that adds to the unique, unglamorous character of the dish. Preparation, you realise, is rudimentary in the extreme. You witness it, or at least infer it from the sounds and the limited equipment. It's a simple process. Pour beans into a pot, boil them for 6 hours over a questionable fire, and then serve with salt pork, a stale biscuit, and a look of mild apology. The apology, you deduce, isn't for the taste, but perhaps for the sheer monotony, or the cook's own weariness from serving the same dish for the 100th time that week. Flavour, you understand, is a luxury and afterthought, if it's thought of at all. Seasoning is whatever blew in from the open window, or perhaps a dash of salt if you're lucky enough to find it. You chew slowly, deliberately, focusing on the texture, the slight resistance of the cooked bean, the starchy earthiness that fills your mouth. The true downside, you quickly learn, is the biological weapon aftermath. You find yourself subtly bracing for it, or perhaps strategically finding a seat near an open window, however small. The collective flatulence and unavoidable consequence of a diet so heavily reliant on beans is a pervasive, if unspoken, reality of saloon life. It's a phenomenon that, as whispered tales suggest, could spark bar fights by a single silent but deadly betrayal near the stove. It adds a pungent comical reality to the dining experience, a low rumbling undercurrent that, if you let your guard down, can catch you by surprise. You might discreetly shift in your seat, offering a silent knowing glance to a fellow diner who also seems to be attempting a subtle evasion. This is the plain truth of the Wild West diet, a truth far removed from any romanticised notions of frontier heroism, and it defines the very air you breathe within these walls. If beans were the soul of the Wild West diet, then salt pork was its slightly greasier backbone. You see it in barrels near the back, or perhaps hanging in thick slabs from hooks, a pervasive presence. This isn't your crisp, flavourful bacon. No, this is a slab of fat and meat so tough, so robustly preserved, that it could survive a thunderstorm, a bar brawl, and 6 months in a saddlebag without changing texture. You might even speculate it could outlast a saloon itself. It's a testament to the brutal demands of preservation in an era before refrigeration, an age where food had to be able to endure the harshest conditions without succumbing to decay. You observe the process heavily salted and often smoked. This salt pork was preserved in barrels with enough brine to season a small ocean. The visual is striking thick layers of salt encrusting the meat, a stark, almost crystalline shell designed to ward off any microbial intrusions. You imagine the sheer volume of salt required, and the thought makes your mouth feel dry even before you taste the meat itself. This rigorous preservation makes it barely edible in its raw form, a culinary challenge rather than a delight. Yet it is invaluable. The greasy residue you notice seems to cling to everything and everyone in the saloon. It coats the counter, leaves a faint sheen on the tin plates, and undoubtedly lingers on the hands and lips of those who consume it. You might catch a whiff of its distinctive cured aroma, a scent that is both intensely savoury and faintly rancid, a mixture that speaks volumes about its journey from slaughterhouse to your plate. It's a smell that announces its presence, a greasy sentinel of survival. The quality of salt pork, you quickly discover, varies wildly. Cooked right, which is to say fried until it's crispy and sizzling. It offers a satisfying crunch, a burst of intense saltiness, and a much-needed injection of fat into an otherwise lean diet. The sizzle itself is a small comfort, a sound of actual cooking, in a place where most food seems to just appear boiled into submission. But cooked wrong, which is often the case given the hurried nature of saloon kitchens, it was like chewing a salted boot heel dipped in axle grease. You mentally prepare yourself for either extreme understanding that consistency is a luxury the frontier simply cannot afford. Your jaw aches just at the thought of it. Despite its variable quality, salt pork is prized above all for its transportability and its ability to add a salty punch of joy, or more realistically, a reason to drink more whiskey to bland beans. It transforms a monotonous meal into something slightly more tolerable, providing a much-needed burst of flavour, however crude. The cook you observe wastes nothing. The precious fat rendered from the cooking process is carefully saved, destined for frying other meagre ingredients, a testament to the absolute necessity of resourcefulness. And as for the rind, that tough, leathery outer layer that's typically tossed to the dogs, skulking around the saloon's back door, or on a particularly uncharitable day to unlucky newcomers who didn't know the difference. You make a mental note to politely decline any offerings that resemble dried leather, understanding that survival here means quick, sometimes unspoken lessons in discerning the edible from the merely tough. The ultimate quality test for salt pork, you realise with a grim chuckle, is chillingly simple. Did it kill the last guy? If the answer is no, then it's fit for consumption. A low bar that perfectly encapsulates the frontier's pragmatic approach to sustenance and its constant dance with risk. Beyond the unwavering dominance of beans and salt pork, there's another ubiquitous presence in the saloon kitchen, a culinary chameleon that you'll encounter with disturbing regularity: the stew. It arrives hot, vaguely meaty, and almost always deeply suspicious. A perfect cover story for whatever odds and ends the cook had lying around or couldn't legally describe. You eye the bubbling brown-grey slurry in the large pot, noting that it invariably smelled way better than it looked. This is the great equalizer, the catch-all, the dish that truly embodies the resourcefulness or desperation of frontier cooking. The foundation for this concoction is always something simple: water, perhaps some pre-boiled beans or a handful of potatoes. But after that, the ingredients become a wild, unpredictable lottery. Whatever hadn't walked away yet found its way into the pot. You might imagine chunks of beef if the saloon was prosperous or near a ranch, but it could just as easily be rabbit, squirrel, or rattlesnake. The very thought conjures a grim amusement. You wonder if the cook plays a daily game of guess the protein. There's a story whispered among the older patrons, a traveller's grim claim of once finding a bootstring at the bottom of his bowl, highlighting the sheer randomness and often alarming creativity that went into these frontier stews. You try not to let your imagination wander too far as you watch the cook stir the ladle, disappearing into the murky depths. Vegetables, when present at all, are boiled into oblivion, losing all semblance of their original form, colour and texture. You won't find crisp carrots or vibrant greens here. They've surrendered completely to the long, slow simmer. Spices are a rare commodity, a luxury almost unheard of. Often the only seasoning comes from whatever was on the cook's hands or knife, a blend of sweat dust and residual flavours from previous dishes. You recognise the pragmatic nature of this. Spices are expensive to transport and hard to keep fresh in a frontier environment. So you accept the blandness, understanding that flavour is secondary to substance. Despite the mystery and the dubious ingredients, stew is in its own way comfort food. It's hot, a welcome warmth in the chill of a desert night or a drafty saloon. It's filling, providing the necessary calories to fuel a man through a long day of hard labour or a restless night of poker. And perhaps most importantly, it's endlessly stretched by just adding water to feed an unexpected crowd or to make it last for days. You observe how the cook might add another ladle of hot water to the pot, the consistency thinning slightly, but the volume increasing, a small miracle of culinary expansion. It's not uncommon for stew to be reheated 3 days in a row until it developed the consistency and personality of old glue. You might eye a particularly thick batch and wonder just how many iterations it has seen. This cyclical reheating isn't about enhancing flavour. It's about survival, about making every last scrap count. The common wisdom passed down from one weary traveller to another becomes your guiding principle for consuming this staple. Never ask what's in it, because in the Wild West, ignorance wasn't just bliss, it was dinner. This simple rule highlights a profound acceptance of uncertainty, a willingness to overlook the unsavoury details for the sake of nourishment. You eat quietly, you chew slowly, and you don't ask questions. For tonight, and perhaps for many nights to come, the mystery stew will be your dependable, if enigmatic, meal, a constant reminder of necessity. Alongside the ever-present bean, salt pork and mystery stew, every Wild West saloon you quickly learn had something bread-like. This category, however, spanned a spectrum from barely palatable to truly dreadful, typically offering either biscuits or hardtack, which was basically bread's undead cousin. You approach both with a mix of anticipation and trepidation, knowing that what you receive could be either a fleeting comfort or a true test of your dental fortitude. When done right, a rare and almost mythical occurrence, biscuits were a small culinary miracle. You picture them warm, buttery, and flaky enough to convince a man he'd stumbled into a proper kitchen. These were often baked in cast iron pans, emerging golden brown and fragrant, their aroma briefly cutting through the prevailing saloon smells. Such a biscuit served with a generous dollop of molasses could make a tired cowboy feel, for a fleeting moment, almost civilized. The delicate flakiness, the soft crumb, the subtle sweetness of the molasses, these were tiny luxuries savoured because of their rarity. You'd hold it in your hand, feeling the warmth, and perhaps even close your eyes for a moment to truly appreciate the simple pleasure. Hardtack, however, was an entirely different beast. This was a slab of flour and water baked until it could survive nuclear winter. You handle it with a certain respect for its sheer indestructibility. It's a dense, flat, often flavourless cracker designed purely for extreme durability and long-term storage, not for taste or texture. The act of eating hardtack is less about enjoyment and more about strategic engagement. It invariably requires soaking in stew coffee or whiskey for extended periods to become even remotely chewable. You might watch a seasoned prospector dunk his hardtack into his coffee, letting it sit slowly absorbing the dark liquid until it finally softens enough to be broken apart. The loud crunch that reverberates through the saloon if someone tries to bite into it dry, or the soggy, unappealing texture once it's been properly hydrated, are immediate, unavoidable experiences that define this particular bread-like item. You find yourself adopting the same methodical approach, patiently waiting for the rock-hard biscuit to yield to the liquid softening power. The very concept of bread in the Wild West underscores the extreme limitations and practical demands of frontier life. Ingredients like fresh yeast were scarce, and the conditions for baking often less than ideal. So you received what was feasible, either a quickly baked dense biscuit that could be made with readily available flour and lard, or the iron-hard hardtack that could be made in bulk and last for months if not years in a saddlebag or a supply wagon. It was sustenance pure and simple, a delivery mechanism for calories, rather than a delightful addition to a meal. You learn to appreciate the utility of it, even if your palate yearns for something lighter, something softer. This dual reality of bread highlights the constant tension between comfort and survival. The rare good biscuit was a fleeting moment of warmth and pleasure, whisper of home in a harsh land. The ubiquitous hardtack was a grim reminder of that harshness, a testament to endurance. You finish your portion, whether crunchy or soggy, knowing that it has served its purpose, fueling you for whatever trials the untamed frontier might throw at you next. The simple act of consuming these basic carbohydrates becomes a lesson in adaptation, a quiet acceptance of the stark culinary truth of the frontier. After the solid, if uninspiring fare of beans, salt pork, stew and bread, you inevitably turn to the liquid that often defines the Wild West experience, coffee. And here too you quickly learn that saloon coffee is less about taste and more about survival. This isn't your carefully brewed artisanal cup. No, this is a brew so potent it didn't just wake you up, it stared back and dared you to blink. You approach it with a certain wary respect, understanding its power. The aroma of this frontier coffee is distinct, a strong, often burnt scent that fills the air, mingling with the other pervasive saloon smells. It's a smell that promises a jolt, a harsh awakening, a no-nonsense kick to start or restart your day. You might catch a whiff of bitterness, a hint of charcoal, and an undeniable raw earthiness that suggests its humble origins. The recipe for this brutal brew is disarmingly simple, a testament to efficiency over refinement. You witness the process or deduce it from the large, perpetually simmering kettle behind the bar. Take water, throw in a handful of coffee grounds, boil it hard, don't strain it, don't question it. The beans themselves are roughly ground or sometimes even whole, unceremoniously dumped into the kettle and boiled until the liquid turns black and sentient. You imagine the ground swirling in the dark depths, releasing every last molecule of flavour and caffeine, willing to sacrifice pleasantness for sheer potency. The result is a thick, dark concoction that smelled like burnt dreams and tasted like vengeance. You take a sip and the heat scalds your tongue, followed by an immediate intense bitterness that coats your mouth. The texture is often gritty, with coffee grounds inevitably settling at the bottom of your tin cup, a final unyielding surprise in the last sip. You learn to brace for this, perhaps even to tilt your cup just so attempting to avoid the muddy residue. Yet despite its harshness, you drink it. This coffee, you discover, is a true multifunctional survival tool. It kept you warm on cold frontier mornings, its internal heat radiating through your core. It kept you awake during long arduous journeys or endless nights of poker fighting off the encroaching fatigue. It masked hangovers, a crucial service in a place where whiskey flows as freely as water, albeit with far more consequence, and perhaps most importantly, it helped digest questionable stew, acting as a powerful if unpleasant internal cleanser, pushing through whatever culinary mysteries you've consumed. It truly serves as fuel, comfort and punishment all in one tin cup. You also learn that some cooks driven by extreme scarcity would even reuse old grounds. This practice, while economically sound, led to coffee that tasted like disappointment and regret, a watery, flavourless shadow of its already harsh self. Yet even this diluted, almost insultingly weak brew was consumed without complaint. Because as the unwritten rule of the Wild West dictates, you didn't drink coffee for pleasure, you drank it to feel alive and stay that way. It was a necessity, a non-negotiable part of the daily grind, a liquid lifeline that kept you moving forward even when every fibre of your being screamed for rest. You hold the tin cup feeling its warmth and acknowledge its raw, unyielding power, understanding that in this world such basic provisions are what sustain life. Having consumed the staples of the saloon diet, you now turn your attention to the concept of meat, an item that in the Wild West you quickly learn was currency status and occasionally a test of bravery. Unlike the predictable presence of beans and coffee meat, it was a gamble, its availability and quality dictated by circumstance and luck. When you dared to order a steak, you braced yourself because it often yielded a tough, overcooked slab of beef, scorched into obedience and served with exactly zero garnish. The fatty, charred smell of this overcooked meat often hung heavy in the air, a testament to the cook's method of ensuring safety through extreme heat rather than nuanced culinary technique. The visual of such a steak is stark, a dark, almost black exterior, likely a thin cut with little to no juicy pink inside. You approach it with a knife and fork that feel inadequate for the task, mentally preparing for a significant chewing exercise. The texture is often rubbery, requiring real effort to cut and masticate, a far cry from the tender cuts you might remember from a life far away. The flavour, what little there is beyond the char, is usually just beef, plain and simple, without the embellishments of herbs or sauces. When fresh beef was scarce, which was often the case in remote areas of the frontier, alternatives were not just common, they were the norm. You'd encounter dried, jerky, tough strips of meat preserved for long journeys, or salted buffalo, a coarser, gamier version of the ubiquitous salt pork, its flavour intensely savoury and wild. Venison from deer or wild boar from the untamed forests also made their appearances, bringing a different kind of wildness to the plate. Each offered a distinct flavour profile, a whisper of the animals that roamed the vast, unforgiving plains and mountains. In the truly remote areas where supply lines were virtually non-existent and necessity was the mother of culinary invention, the options got more creative or perhaps more alarming. You might be faced with squirrel stew, a humble dish born of opportunism, or a rattlesnake roast, a true test of your adventurous spirit. Roast jackrabbit also found its way onto plates, a lean and gamey offering from the desert. The unwritten rule of the frontier kitchen became horrifyingly clear. If it had legs and didn't belong to a customer's horse, it was fair game. You learn to keep your comments to yourself, understanding that such dietary flexibility is simply a matter of survival. Often you find that No one told you what it was when you received a plate of meat that wasn't immediately identifiable as beef or pork. This was a silent cue, a clear sign to eat quietly and not ask questions. Ignorance, as you've already learned, is often dinner in the Wild West, and this applies doubly to mysterious meats. You find yourself subtly examining the texture, the coloration, perhaps a small bone trying to deduce its origin, but ultimately accepting whatever protein is presented. The ultimate test for any meat, however, was a grimly humorous one. Did it kill the last guy? This question, whispered between seasoned frontiersmen, was a morbidly practical acceptance of potential spoilage, a dark joke that underscored the constant proximity to foodborne illness. You find yourself poking your own portion, just to be sure, a small involuntary ritual born of necessity. This casual acceptance of risk, this stoic approach to potentially dangerous food, epitomizes the raw, unvarnished truth of dining in the Wild West. After the often monotonous and utilitarian main courses, the very concept of dessert in a Wild West saloon seems almost fantastical. You learn quickly that dessert wasn't really a category, it was more of a happy accident, a fleeting moment of sweetness snatched from the relentless demands of frontier survival. When it did appear, it was a rare and cherished luxury, a small comfort in a world defined by hardship. Cornbread, you discover, is the Swiss Army knife of the frontier menu. It's versatile, easy to make with readily available ingredients, and serves many purposes from soaking up stew to being a meal in itself. Often, however, the cornbread you encounter is dry, crumbly, and somewhat bland, a functional baked good rather than a delightful one. But then there's molasses. Our molasses, a dark, sticky, syrupy miracle that transforms the humblest cornbread into something just shy of glorious. You watch as a cowboy drizzles the thick, dark syrup over his portion, its rich, sweet stickiness seeping into the dry crumbs. It's the cowboy's frosting, an affordable, durable sweetener that could withstand the heat and harsh conditions of frontier transport. More importantly, it had a magical ability to mask the sins of even the driest baked goods, adding a rich, earthy sweetness that was a rare and welcome treat for a palate accustomed to salt and grease. The sensation of its sweetness sticky on your lips and fingers is a small, unexpected delight. A pie, however, is a whole different level of culinary statement. You rarely see one, but when you do, with steam-rising crust, golden scent of apples wafting, it's not just food, it's a statement that a saloon meant business. It signifies that the establishment has resources that it can afford the luxury of fruit likely canned or dried, but fruit nonetheless, and that there's a cook capable of turning out something beyond basic sustenance. Even if it's rustic with uneven crusts, perhaps a little burnt on the edges and served lukewarm, it is undeniably a rare treat. You notice the eyes of other patrons lingering on it, a collective appreciation for this fleeting glimpse of domesticity and comfort. A good slice of pie, you learn, was more than just dessert. It was a draw, a valuable commodity that could attract customers and keep them lingering, spending more on whiskey. The value placed on this simple baked good was so immense that, as whispered tales suggest, poker games that ended in gunfire over dessert disputes were recorded. This makes pie practically sacred in the frontier lexicon, a culinary prize worth fighting for. The flaky or crumbly texture of the crust, the sweet tang of the fruit filling the brief burst of warmth. It's a fleeting moment of luxury, a soft contrast to the hard realities of beans and tough meat. You might find yourself chewing, slowly drawing out the experience, savouring every last crumb, understanding that such moments of pure, unadulterated sweetness are few and far between in this rugged existence. This little slice of heaven, however imperfect, offers a tantalizing hint of civilization in the heart of the untamed West. While pie offered a rare, sweet escape, other culinary delights, particularly those associated with breakfast, were even more elusive. Getting eggs and chicken before noon in a Wild West saloon you quickly understand was a miracle or a trap. Fresh eggs, you realise, were akin to gold, Not actual gold, but nearly as rare and equally fragile. They were delicate, perishable, and difficult to transport without breakage in an era of rough roads and even rougher handling. You consider the precarious journey of a single egg from a remote farm to a bustling saloon, and its rarity becomes immediately apparent. Chickens themselves, the source of these precious eggs, were cranky, prone to wandering, and occasionally stolen. They were often kept in flimsy coops behind the saloon, clucking indignantly, always on the verge of escaping or becoming prey to local wildlife. Their very existence in a frontier town was tenuous, making their output all the more valuable. The sounds of their distant clucking might occasionally drift into the saloon, a subtle reminder of the precariousness of their supply. When offered eggs, you quickly learned not to ask what kind they were. You hoped for chicken, of course, the most common and recognisable, but there was always the unspoken possibility of duck eggs, or even, in more desperate circumstances, something less conventional. The uncertainty of origin was simply part of the Wild West dining experience. To question was to invite suspicion, or worse, to be denied. So you ate what was given and you hoped for the best. The preparation of these rare eggs was often designed to disguise their true state. Eggs were frequently scrambled to disguise colour, a clever way to hide any telltale signs of age or inconsistency in yolk hue. If fried, they were cooked until the yolks turned to leather, a firm, almost rubbery texture that ensured safety through extreme heat. A telltale wobble in the yolk might signal a need for an immediate chaser of whiskey, a grim joke among the seasoned diners. The metallic scrape of a fork against the tin plate as you cut into the tough egg served as an auditory reminder of its unyielding nature. Fried chicken, when available, was similarly a frontier interpretation of a classic. It was usually a scrawny bird that died angry, its lean stringy meat a far cry from the plump tender birds of modern farms. It was tough, bony, and fried until its flavour, whatever little it possessed, had tapped out, leaving behind a dry, fibrous texture. You might even find to your dismay a feather in your gravy, a small unwanted souvenir of its rustic preparation. Despite these imperfections, it was still meat that wasn't beans or mystery stew, and for that alone it was consumed gratefully. The very act of being offered eggs or chicken speaks to a transient moment of relative prosperity for the saloon, or perhaps a temporary abundance for the cook. These items were not consistent staples. They were fleeting luxuries subject to the whims of nature and the immediate success of trapping or trading. You savour the moment knowing that it might be days, weeks, or even months before such a culinary miracle graces your plate again. This understanding deepens your appreciation for every bite, transforming even the toughest fried chicken or the leathery scrambled eggs into a valuable source of sustenance, a testament to the unpredictable bounty of the untamed land, and you begin to appreciate the simpler, enduring forms of sustenance that define this rugged world. Among the culinary gambles of the Wild West saloon cheese did exist, but you quickly learn it was a lot like a poker game full of risk. Without the luxury of refrigeration, the preservation of dairy products was a constant challenge, leading to a spectrum of cheese qualities that range from merely questionable to outright adventurous. You approach it with a certain trepidation, recognizing the potent olfactory warning signs. Most saloon cheese you observe fell into one of two distinct categories. It was either hard yellow and suspiciously sweaty, a block of solid dairy that seemed to exude a faint oily sheen, its colour deepening to an almost unnatural hue. Or it was soft crumbly and slightly aggressive to the nose, a more yielding variety that had clearly developed a personality over its journey and time spent on a warm shelf. The pungent aroma was often immediate, announcing its presence long before you even saw it, a distinct tang of fermentation, sometimes pleasant, sometimes alarmingly sharp. You might wrinkle your nose slightly, then steel yourself, knowing this is part of the frontier experience. The quality of this frontier cheese varied wildly, a testament to its dubious origins and storage conditions. It could be anything from a lump of dairy guesswork with salt on top, an amorphous blob that defied easy classification to cheese that might have been old butter gone wrong, or curdled milk pressed into a bar shape and rolled in pepper. The pepper, you realise, was often less about flavour and more about masking unwanted smells or deterring insects, a pragmatic addition to a less than perfect product. You recall hearing a merchant once grimly declare that Nevada cheese had a hauntingly unpleasant taste, perhaps reminiscent of boiled sock with a tough outer rind, a vivid if unappetizing description that sticks in your mind. Despite its dubious quality and often challenging aroma, cheese was consumed. It offered a crucial balance of saltiness to a often bland diet, and more importantly, provided much-needed protein and fat in a concentrated form. You might see it melted haphazardly over beans, its oily richness adding a different dimension to the staple, or perhaps thinly sliced onto a piece of cornbread, offering a slight tang to the otherwise dry baked good. It was valuable precisely because it was dairy, a rare and often perishable food group. Its mere presence was a sign of a slightly more developed supply chain, or at least a diligent cook. Any cheese at all, you conclude, was considered a symbol of civilization in a rough and tumble place like a Wild West saloon. It spoke of connections to dairy farms, however distant, and perhaps a modicum of effort in bringing perishable goods to the frontier. While it might not have been the gourmet delight of European cheeses, it was a tangible link to a more settled existence, a small piece of the familiar in an otherwise untamed world. You take a bite bracing for the flavour and acknowledge that even this lump of dairy guesswork represents a small victory against the overwhelming scarcity of the frontier. This enduring human desire for variety and nourishment, even when faced with significant challenges in supplying quality, is a testament to the persistent hope that even in the Wild West a moment of unexpected flavour might appear. As you navigate the culinary landscape of the Wild West Saloon, you encounter another cornerstone of frontier sustenance: pickled goods. Before the advent of refrigeration, pickling wasn't merely a culinary choice, it was a survival strategy, a vital method of preserving food using brine and sourness to keep food from crawling off the shelf. You see jars of these preserved items lining shelves behind the bar, their cloudy liquid and suspended contents a familiar sight. The strong vinegary smell of pickled goods is a common presence, mingling with the other pervasive aromas of the saloon, cutting through the heavier scents with its sharp acidity. This pickling strategy encompassed a surprising variety of items. Pickled cucumbers, perhaps the most recognisable, were a staple. You bite into one and it offers a satisfying crunch followed by a sharp, tangy burst of flavour that awakens your palate, a welcome contrast to the often bland or greasy main dishes. Their crispness and acidity provide a refreshing counterpoint, a small, vibrant punctuation mark in a meal dominated by soft textures and muted flavours. More adventurous and often more visually striking were pickled eggs. These ghostly eyeballs float eerily in cloudy jars behind the bar, their once vibrant yolks now muted, their whites opaque and slightly rubbery. You might hesitate for a moment, eyeing their somewhat unsettling appearance, which often evokes a certain texture of sadness in those who are brave enough to try them. Yet they were a source of protein and could last indefinitely, making them an invaluable snack in a place where fresh proteins were rare. You might see a cowboy pluck one out of its jar, pop it into his mouth, and chew with a stoic indifference, a testament to the frontier's pragmatism. Pickled onions were another common offering, their small translucent forms packed tightly in jars. These were sharp, tangy, and strong enough to chase off unwanted conversation, their pungent aroma and intense flavour leaving a lasting impression. You'd likely approach them cautiously, knowing that a single pickled onion could clear your sinuses and awaken every taste bud in your mouth. They served not just as a side dish, but almost as palate cleanser, a powerful reset button for your senses. Even pickled peaches or pears found their way into saloon offerings, providing a wet vinegary optimism that was both sweet and tart. These were rarer, perhaps saved for special occasions or when a supply wagon unexpectedly brought fruit to town. The combination of fruit and vinegar was an unusual but effective way to preserve sweetness, a surprisingly complex flavour profile for the untamed West. You find yourself intrigued by the ingenuity, the sheer determination to preserve every scrap of available food. The long shelf life of these pickled goods was invaluable in an environment where other foods spoiled quickly and transport was slow and unreliable. They offered a consistent source of nutrients and flavour, a reliable backup when fresh provisions ran out. You recognise them as a testament to human adaptability, a clever solution to the problem of food scarcity and spoilage. As you chew on a crisp pickled cucumber or eye a ghostly pickled egg, you understand that these briny treasures are more than just food. They're a tangible representation of survival ingenuity and the relentless pursuit of sustenance against the odds, a constant reminder of the cunning needed to thrive. When all else failed, or perhaps when solid food simply ceased to exist, cowboys and drifters alike inevitably turned to the most dependable item on the saloon menu, whiskey. You quickly realise that whiskey in the Wild West isn't just a drink. It's a liquid meal, a caloric substitute, and a multi-purpose survival tool. It requires no preparation, no cooking, no elaborate display. In sufficient quantity, it allows one to forget you are hungry, or that you'd just eaten a bowl of squirrel mystery meat. The sharp, burning sensation as it goes down is immediate, a visceral shock that jolts your senses and prepares your body for its potent effects. Wild West whiskey, you quickly learn, is rough, raw, and often dangerous. This isn't the aged, refined spirit you might know. It's often made from corn, rye, or whatever the barkeep had lying around, a testament to its expedient and often haphazard production. Known colloquially as rot gut or chain lightning, these names are not exaggerations. You hear tales of its potent, almost corrosive qualities, and you feel the burn yourself, a fiery path from your throat to your stomach that offers an immediate if fleeting sense of warmth. Beyond its intoxicating effects, this frontier whiskey serves a surprising array of functions. It could clean wounds, its high alcohol content acting as a crude antiseptic, a desperate measure when medical supplies were scarce. It could strip paint, a stark reminder of its raw potency. And perhaps most famously, it could fuel a fistfight, lowering inhibitions and igniting tempers in the volatile environment of a saloon. You see the evidence of its power in the loud conversations, the sudden bursts of laughter, and the occasional violent outburst that punctuates the general din. Its quality, you understand, is largely irrelevant. It is barely more than coloured moonshine, often with additives range from tobacco juice to cayenne pepper to give it colour kick or simply to stretch the supply. This wasn't about refined flavour profiles or smooth finishes. It was consumed because it was warm, cheap and honest, the only thing on the menu that never lied about what it was. You know what you're getting with a shot of rot gut, an immediate unadulterated burn that promises oblivion or at least temporary forgetfulness. You observe how it loosens tongues, emboldens the timid, and in some cases renders the strongest man insensible. On hard nights when food was scarce or simply inedible, whiskey became quite literally dinner. It dulled the pangs of hunger, provided a temporary sense of fullness, and allowed a man to simply drift off into a hazy, dreamless sleep, forgetting the discomforts of the day and the emptiness in his stomach. You watch as a weary miner pours himself another glass, a silent ritual of self-preservation, opting for the liquid escape over the dubious solids offered from the kitchen. The sharp alcoholic bite offers a fleeting artificial comfort, a desperate form of sustenance in a world that offered few genuine comforts. The saloon therefore offers not just food, but also a potent liquid alternative, a testament to the raw human drive to survive, even if survival means blurring the edges of reality with a strong drink. Beyond the immediate sensory experience of saloon dining, you begin to grasp that broader societal and environmental forces profoundly dictated what nourishment was even possible. Your perspective shifts from the individual plate to the overarching structures that shaped daily life in the Wild West. You quickly realize that food, or the lack thereof, was deeply intertwined with social dynamics. Within the saloon, while the broader Wild West certainly had its defined social hierarchies, lawmen, outlaws, miners, cowboys, and transient labourers, the fundamental need for sustenance often levelled these distinctions. You observe that everyone, regardless of their outside standing, relied on the same basic limited fare. The stew was truly the great culinary equalizer. The richest gambler might eat the same tough salt pork as the poorest prospector, perhaps at the same rough-hewn table. The shared crude quality of meals fostered a temporary common ground among diverse patrons. The clatter of tin plates and mugs, the scrape of metal forks, and the low murmurs of conversation were universal sounds echoing across social divides. A democratic symphony of hunger being appeased. True social elevation within the saloon, you learn, was often fleeting, directly tied to immediate financial success. A sudden influx of cash from a particularly good poker hand or the sale of a small gold nugget could allow for the rare luxury of a steak, that tough scorched slab you've already encountered, or even more miraculously a slice of pie. These moments were brief, a temporary elevation above the usual diet of beans and hardtack. You see the subtle shift in posture, the slight air of superiority in a man who could afford such a rare treat. This demonstrated how readily available food, however basic, could translate into moments of perceived status and indulgence, a fleeting display of economic power in a world where such displays were often physical, not culinary. What's truly fascinating, however, is the unique power inversion centred around the saloon cook. Despite often being of a lower societal standing, perhaps a drifter, a former prospector, or a sturdy frontier woman, the cook commanded disproportionate power within the establishment. Their authority wasn't formal or legal. It was practical, stemming directly from their absolute control over the food supply. They dictated what was served, how much, and to whom. This practical authority inverted typical social dynamics, showing how basic necessities could reshape hierarchies in the frontier environment. The cook, with their soot-covered apron and omnipresent ladle, held unexpected influence over the daily comfort or discomfort of every patron. You might notice even the most hardened cowboy speaking with a slightly softer tone to the cook, or a barkeep offering an extra shot of whiskey as a subtle form of appeasement. It's a quiet, understanding insult the cook, and your next meal might be particularly meagre or suspiciously fibrous, a silent testament to their undeniable authority. Beyond the social dynamics of the saloon itself, you delve deeper into the core economy and resource management that shaped frontier sustenance. The entire saloon food economy, you come to realize, was driven by an urgent and absolute imperative, the need for cheap, non-perishable ingredients. This wasn't a choice, but a harsh reality imposed by remote locations and extremely poor transport infrastructure. You see the direct evidence of this economic imperative in the prevalence of beans. Valued for their indestructibility and remarkably low cost, they were paramount. They could be bought in bulk, transported with relative ease, and stored for long periods without spoilage, making them the ultimate survival food. The sparse clinking of meagre coins exchanged for these basic provisions underscores their economic necessity, a reminder that every penny counted in this unforgiving landscape. Salt pork preserved in copious brine was similarly prized for its longevity. It could withstand the elements and the rough handling of wagons, forming the greasy backbone of the diet. You imagine the long, arduous journeys of these provisions rattling over dusty trails, enduring heat and cold until they finally reach the distant saloon. The logistical challenges of the Wild West directly impacted the availability of fresh ingredients. The vast distances between settlements and the complete lack of modern infrastructure meant that refrigeration was non-existent. transport was agonizingly slow, often relying on mules or slow-moving wagons that could take weeks or months to reach their destination. This made perishable items like fresh meat, vegetables, and dairy rare luxuries, almost mythical in their appearance. You learn that if you saw a fresh apple, it was probably a cause for celebration. This forced saloons to rely heavily on dried, salted, or canned goods if cans were even available, or they depended on whatever could be hunted locally, leading to a largely monotonous and often questionable diet, one that favoured endurance over flavour. Yet within this scarcity you observe an ingenious resourcefulness. Saloon cooks, driven by sheer necessity, were masters of stretching limited resources to their absolute maximum. You've seen them endlessly stretch stew by adding water, a simple act that could make a meagre pot feed several more hungry mouths. You know they reused old coffee grounds to maximise their brew, extracting every last bit of caffeine and colour from the precious beans, and you've tasted how generously molasses was applied to mail the sins of even the driest baked goods, transforming stale bread into something almost palatable. This constant adaptation to scarcity was a defining characteristic of frontier cuisine, reflecting a pragmatic, almost desperate approach to survival over culinary excellence. Every scrap, every drop, every crumb was valued and reused, a silent testament to the daily struggle against want. For many saloons providing food, however, basic wasn't primarily about direct profit. It was a crucial draw to attract customers who would then purchase the more lucrative whiskey. Offering whiskey specials with a side of beans or a biscuit was a calculated move aimed at keeping patrons upright and drinking longer. The strategy was clear: offer enough sustenance to prevent patrons from passing out, ensuring they remained conscious and capable of buying more drinks. The faint, persistent smell of stale beer, intermingling with the cooking odours, reinforces this business model. Food was a means to an end, a strategic component of the saloon's core business model, ensuring a steady flow of thirsty customers. You recognise this shrewdness, understanding that even in the roughest environments business was business, and every tactic to draw in a customer was fair game. Beyond the confines of the saloon's economy and its social machinations, you realise that nature itself played the most relentless hand in dictating the realities of food. The Wild West's harsh and unpredictable environment, its vast arid landscapes, unpredictable weather patterns and recurrent natural disasters profoundly shaped the availability and quality of every morsel that reached your plate. This was the ultimate authority and unyielding force that superseded any human ingenuity or economic strategy. Droughts, you learn, were a constant looming threat. They could decimate crops, turning fertile lands into parched dust bowls, leading to widespread famine that forced dependence on non-perishable goods and opportunistic hunting. You feel a palpable sense of food, insecurity and anxiety among the populace, a quiet desperation that hums beneath the surface of daily life. The very air itself often felt dry, carrying the scent of distant dust storms, a constant reminder of nature's power. You imagine the despair of watching crops wither, knowing that such a sight meant hardship for everyone. Without modern refrigeration or efficient transportation networks, perishable food spoiled rapidly, especially in the warmer climates of the West. This wasn't merely an inconvenience. It necessitated the widespread adoption of laborious preservation methods like salting, drying, and pickling. These techniques, which you've already observed in practice, transformed from choices into grim necessities. You understand that this explains the prevalence of suspicious meat that had been hanging around long enough to earn names, where the metallic tang of decay was sometimes detectable, a grim test of your stomach and your resolve. The struggle against spoilage was a daily losing battle, often fought with insufficient tools. The supply of fresh meat, eggs, and even the ability to keep chickens was subject to myriad natural threats. Harsh weather, whether searing heat or biting cold, could stress and kill animals. predators like foxes, wolves, or even larger carnivores posed a constant threat to livestock. Diseases could sweep through herds, decimating a rancher's stock in a matter of days. Or more simply, animals could just wander off into the vast untamed wilderness, never to be seen again. This inherent unpredictability forced cooks to be endlessly adaptable, often relying on whatever hadn't walked away yet, even if it meant a rattlesnake roast for dinner. The sounds of restless horses outside the saloon, their hooves shifting on the dusty ground, were a constant reminder of the untamed wild and the precariousness of domestic animal life. Perhaps most insidiously, the chronic scarcity and often questionable quality of saloon food meant that hunger and foodborne illness were constant underlying threats. Without formal health regulations or indeed any organised relief efforts, individuals simply had to eat what was there and hoped it didn't eat you back. This stoic acceptance of illness as a grim reality was pervasive. If you succumbed to food poisoning, well, that was just the unforgiving West reminding you who was truly in charge, fostering a resigned acceptance of suffering. You recall the clammy feel of fever, the gut-wrenching cramps, and the knowledge that such battles were often fought in isolation with little help. The environment wasn't just a backdrop, it was an active participant in every meal, dictating what was eaten, how it was preserved, and what risks you undertook with every bite. This deep understanding makes you appreciate the resilience and indeed the sheer stubbornness of those who dared to make a life in such a demanding landscape, forever shaped by nature's unyielding hand. Amidst the stark realities of frontier sustenance, you find that unspoken rules and social customs profoundly shaped the human interactions around food and drink within the Wild West Saloon. It's a delicate dance of unspoken expectations and swift consequences, a reflection of the raw social fabric of the era. Communication around food in saloons, you observe, was direct, devoid of pleasantries, and often purely transactional. There were no polite inquiries about your day, no gentle suggestions about the specials. A cook might shout something like beans or stew across the room, and patrons were expected to shout back your choice without looking up. This lack of ceremony reflected a culture where efficiency and raw practicality trumped polite discourse. The quick, decisive exchange of words mirrored the overall directness of frontier life where time was precious and formalities were a luxury. You learned to speak your order clearly and concisely without hesitation, understanding that brevity is respected. For newcomers, the process of ordering food often involved a silent, evaluative stare from the cook. This wasn't merely a chef assessing a customer. It was a frontier gatekeeper, trying to guess whether you were going to pay or pass out before the plate hit the table. This non-verbal communication was a crucial part of vetting strangers, a subtle power play that determined how one was received in the communal space. It was often accompanied by an uncomfortable silence, broken only by the ambient noise of the saloon, making the simple act of ordering a meal feel like a quiet interrogation. You feel the weight of their gaze, knowing that first impressions here carry real weight. A cardinal rule quickly absorbed into your understanding of saloon etiquette was never insult the cook. This wasn't just about good manners. It underscored a deep-seated pragmatism where survival outweighed personal preference. The tough texture of the food, its dubious smell, or its monotonous flavour was to be accepted without comment. Challenging the cook, you understood, could have immediate and unpleasant consequences given their absolute control over your daily sustenance. A quiet grumble might pass unnoticed, but an open complaint would be met with scorn, perhaps a smaller portion, or even a sudden chilling silence from the cook that signalled much worse. The adage, "never ask what's in it," when referring to the mystery stew was more than just a saying. It was a cultural imperative. Here, ignorance wasn't just bliss. It was often dinner promoting an acceptance of the unknown for the sake of nourishment. This reflected a society where explicit knowledge could indeed be a burden, and trusting the cook, or at least not questioning them, was paramount to avoiding discomfort and potential confrontation. You learn to eat silently, acknowledging the unspoken agreement that some things are best left unexamined. Beyond sustenance, whiskey served as the primary social glue in the saloon. Readily available and consumed generously, it was central to social rituals. Men bought it to make friends, to start fights, and occasionally to apologize after both, highlighting its potent, almost paradoxical role in both forging and fracturing social bonds. The burning taste of the liquor facilitated a complex range of human interactions, often blurring the lines between camaraderie and conflict, making the saloon a stage for both community and chaos. You observe the shifts in mood, the rise and fall of voices all lubricated by the amber liquid, and understand its profound influence on the Wild West social fabric. Within the saloon's rough-hewn walls, the distribution and consumption of food directly reflected and reinforced the raw power dynamics and human resilience of the Wild West. You start to see how the simple act of eating is a microcosm of the frontier's governance conflicts and quiet dissent. The cook, as you've observed, is a figure of informal but potent power within the saloon, their dominion often overlooked but universally acknowledged. Their practical sovereignty rivaled that of the bartender, the sheriff, and the town preacher combined. This authority didn't come from a badge or a book. It stemmed directly from their control over the food supply. They dictated what was served, how much, and to whom. This practical authority inverted typical social dynamics, showing how essential resources translated into immediate social sway in a frontier setting. You hear the rhythmic sizzling of fat in the pan from the kitchen, a constant subtle reminder of their influence, a quiet hum of power that permeates the air. A slight charring on your salt pork, a slightly thinner broth in your stew, these are the subtle indicators of the cook's mood, a quiet message passed from kitchen to table. This power allowed for a personalized system of patronage and retribution. If they liked you, you got the freshest cut. If not, you got the spoon scrapings from last night's disaster reheated into chilly surprise. This informal system of reward and punishment based on personal favour rather than formal law illustrated the raw, personalised power dynamics inherent in saloon life. There were no appeals, no higher authorities to complain to. Your standing with the cook directly impacted your daily sustenance, creating a delicate dance of unspoken respect and subtle deference from the patrons. You learn to offer a brief, polite nod, a small acknowledgement that you understand their position. Beyond their culinary duties, cooks often functioned as the saloon's unofficial bouncer. The implied threat of physical violence, whether through their imposing stature or the tools of their trade, was a powerful deterrent. No one wanted to get hit by a ladle that had just survived frying salt pork, a heavy, greasy implement that could deliver a significant blow. Or more explicitly, the cleaver, which could clear a room faster than a shotgun, its glinting blade a chilling promise of swift, painful consequences. The loud clang of metal on metal from the kitchen, a dropped pan, a knife hitting the chopping block could signal impending trouble, a warning that the cook was in no mood for nonsense. This non-legal enforcement mechanism was remarkably effective within the saloon's often volatile environment, where formal law enforcement was often distant or non-existent. The cook, therefore, was not merely a provider of food, but a key enforcer of order, a culinary sovereign in a realm of chaos, holding silent sway over all who dined. Within the rough-and-tumble environment of the Wild West Saloon, where formal legal systems were largely absent for minor disputes, conflicts often escalated rapidly. You learn that frontier justice, raw and immediate, often played out directly at the table, especially when food or drink was involved. Conflicts, even those as seemingly trivial as arguments over the last slice of pie, could escalate with terrifying speed. You might witness a heated exchange, voices rising, chairs scraping, and then suddenly the chilling sound of a hammer being cocked, or the glint of metal under the dim lamplight. Tales, often whispered with a mixture of awe and morbid humour, spoke of poker games that, ended in gunfire over dessert disputes. This demonstrated a grim truth that you took the last slice was as valid an offence as cheating at cards, highlighting a rough immediate form of justice where personal honour and self-enforcement prevailed over structured law. There was no court, no judge, just the immediate, often violent resolution. The ubiquitous presence of firearms meant that personal grievances, including those related to food or drink, could be resolved through immediate violence. This direct, often brutal application of force was a primary enforcement mechanism on the frontier. Men frequently took justice into their own hands rather than relying on distant or non-existent authorities. You hear the sharp crack of a gunshot followed by a sudden stunned silence, then the rush of bodies towards the commotion. These weren't mere brawls. They were often lethal confrontations that could erupt with little warning, leading to sudden violent ends to disagreements. The very air in the saloon, thick with smoke and stale beer, seemed to vibrate with this underlying tension, the constant possibility of violence. You learn to read the room to recognize the subtle cues that might precede such an outburst, and to make yourself scarce when necessary. This environment fostered a grim acceptance of risk, a fatalistic view of life and death that extended even to the food you consumed. The saloon motto for suspicious meat, "Did it kill the last guy?" reflected this grimly pragmatic acceptance of risk. This nonchalant attitude towards potentially spoiled or unhealthy food underscored the constant proximity to death and disease on the frontier. It wasn't about seeking retribution or demanding quality. It was about sheer resilience and a willingness to gamble with one's health for basic sustenance. You understand that complaints were useless and survival was the only goal. If saloon food did cause illness, it was often met with fatalistic acceptance rather than anger, or a demand for compensation. If it gave you food poisoning, well, that was simply the West reminding you who was in charge. This perspective framed personal suffering not as a failure of the establishment or a call for retribution, but as an inherent part of the untamed environment. It reinforced a stoic, if resigned, approach to hardship. The clammy feel of fever, the gnawing pain in your gut, these were personal battles endured in isolation, often with little more than a swig of whiskey as a remedy. There was no social safety net, no public health system. You simply bore your suffering, understanding that such discomfort was merely another facet of surviving on the untamed frontier, a harsh lesson delivered by the very sustenance meant to keep you alive. You continue to witness how deeply ingrained the practical hierarchy is within the saloon, a power structure that extends far beyond the kitchen. The bartender, too, holds a unique and powerful position, a vital cog in the machine of frontier sustenance and social order. He is the dispenser of the most coveted liquid in the West, whiskey, the ultimate liquid meal. His control over the flow of this potent spirit grants him an influence that often rivals or even surpasses that of the cook. The bartender, you observe, is more than just a server. He's often the confidant, the unofficial banker, and sometimes the arbiter of disputes. His judgment can determine who gets credit, who receives a generous pour, and who is quietly but firmly cut off. You see the subtle nods exchange the knowing glances that speak volumes about who is in favour and who is on thin ice. His presence behind the long wooden counter is a constant, almost gravitational force in the saloon. The rhythmic clink of bottles and glasses, the splash of liquid into a shot glass, these sounds create a steady background rhythm, a testament to his ceaseless activity and central role. His power is amplified by the fact that whiskey, as you've learned, serves as an ultimate survival tool to numb the pain of the harsh frontier existence. This includes the physical discomfort of highly questionable stew, the aching joints from long days on the trail, or the emotional toll of loneliness and isolation. It allows cowboys to forget you were hungry, or that you'd just eaten a bowl of squirrel mystery meat, illustrating a profound form of self-medication against the constant physical and psychological strains of daily life. The burning sensation offered a fleeting artificial comfort, an immediate escape from reality, and the bartender is the gatekeeper to that escape. The price of whiskey, while seemingly cheap by modern standards, was a significant expenditure for many a frontiersman. It was a tangible drain on meagre resources, yet it was rarely foregone. You see men carefully counting out their coins, their faces etched with a mixture of desire and resignation before pushing them across the counter. This act of purchase is more than a simple transaction. It's an investment in temporary oblivion, a trade of hard-earned money for a brief respite from the relentless grind. The sharp alcoholic bite offers a fleeting artificial comfort, a desperate form of sustenance in a world that offered few genuine comforts. You notice the way men linger over their empty glasses, sometimes ordering another, sometimes just savouring the last vestiges of its warmth, before returning to the cold realities outside. This dynamic between the bartender, the whiskey, and the patrons underscores a key aspect of frontier life, the constant search for relief, for escape, for anything that could dull the sharp edges of an unforgiving world. The saloon therefore becomes not just a place to eat and drink, but a psychological refuge, a haven, where for a few hours the world outside could be forgotten, or at least muted. The bartender in his quiet efficiency facilitates this escape, a crucial figure in the unspoken economy of survival and solace, understanding that his product often offers much more than mere calories. The frontier's grim acceptance of risk extended even into the most fundamental act of survival eating. You've already touched upon the saloon motto for suspicious meat, "Did it kill the last guy?" and you feel its weight as you consider the unspoken risks. This isn't just a casual joke, it reflects a grimly pragmatic acceptance of risk, a nonchalant attitude towards potentially spoiled or unhealthy food that underscore the constant proximity to death and disease on the frontier. You learn that in this world the emphasis isn't on honour through purity of food, or on the pursuit of exquisite flavours, but on sheer resilience and a willingness to gamble with one's health for basic sustenance. There is no alternative, no choice but to consume what is available and hope for the best. This stoicism pervades every aspect of life, especially when it comes to the consequences of such a diet. If saloon food did cause illness, it was often met not with anger or a demand for accountability, but with fatalistic acceptance. If it made you sick, well, that was simply the West reminding you who was in charge, asserting its raw authority over your very being. This perspective framed personal suffering not as a failure of the establishment or a call for retribution against the cook, but as an inherent part of the untamed environment itself. It reinforced a stoic, if resigned, approach to hardship, a silent understanding that the frontier demanded a heavy toll. You recall the clammy feel of fever, the gnawing pain in your gut, the raw discomfort. These were personal battles often endured in isolation, with little more than a swig of whiskey as a remedy. The lack of formal medical care, the absence of public health regulations, and the sheer isolation meant that suffering was a private affair. There were no immediate relief efforts, no sympathetic doctors rushing to your aid. You simply had to eat what was there and hoped it didn't eat you back, accepting illness as a grim reality, a random roll of the dice in the constant gamble of survival. This fatalism, this quiet resignation to the unpredictable whims of nature and circumstance, is a defining characteristic of the frontier spirit. It shapes not just how people ate, but how they lived, and how they ultimately faced their own mortality. The Wild West Saloon therefore offered more than just a meal. It provided a gritty, greasy, and undeniably real microcosm of frontier life. Every bite and every drink was a testament to endurance, a stark reminder of the thin line between survival and oblivion. It was a place where basic needs met harsh realities, where ingenuity was born of scarcity, and where every flavour, however questionable, carried the taste of perseverance. You leave the saloon, the echoes of its raw reality lingering, and as the sounds and smells begin to fade, you find yourself drifting back towards the present, leaving the dust and grit of the frontier behind. As the echoes of the Wild West Saloon begin to quiet in your mind, let the images of tough beans, salty pork, and that potent coffee gently recede. You've journeyed through a time when sustenance was a battle and comfort a fleeting dream. Feel the solid ground beneath you, the warmth of your own bed, and the comforting quiet of your surroundings. The hardships of the frontier, the mystery of the stew, the bite of the rot gut, they are now safely in the past, a history to ponder as you drift into slumber. Allow your thoughts to soften, your breathing to deepen, and the stresses of your day to melt away. There's no need to worry about what's in the stew tonight or if your coffee will stare back at you. Just peace.